episode of Go Blue with Stu is sponsored by Honey, the easiest way to save money when shopping on your phone or your computer. You ever been in this spot? You're shopping for something online, you get to checkout, and when I ask you for a promo code, you start Googling trying to find a way to save some money. Thanks to Honey, manually searching for coupon codes is a thing of the past, because Honey is the free tool that scours the internet for you and finds the one that best fits your cart. Here's how it works. You're shopping, you check out, the Honey button pops up, you click apply coupons, you wait a few seconds, you watch the price you pay go down. Simple. So if you already don't have Honey, you could straight up be missing out. By getting it, you'll be doing yourself a solid and supporting the show. I'd never recommend something I don't use. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/March Madness. That's joinhoney.com/March Madness. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Go Blue with Stu. I am your host, Stuart Douglas. Today, we got Zach Shaw with 24/7 Sports, covers Michigan. He's been on top of it lately, so I had to have him on. Zach, you are in San Antonio. How's it going down there? I heard we talked before I hit record. Free margaritas is all I've been hearing in my head.
Yeah. This city, they know how to throw a party. I mean, anyone who's been here knows the River Walk. It's just like basically 50 bars on top of a river, and they're all serving stuff. And apparently the airport hotels want to be a part of it. So no, it's a good time. Really enjoying the warmer weather. I know it's been decently warm this month up in Michigan, but today it was like 75. Tomorrow's going to be 80. So it's nice. I'd say it's like spring break, but I also have to work more or less around the clock. So it's a little bit of both.
Well, it's been pouring in Indy.
Okay.
So you're lucky, but I am interested to hear, we talked about a little before I hit record, but you get to see a new city, but then you're like, hey, I got to go. We got press conferences, we got practice to cover, and there's like a lot of dull time in between there. It's like, when those points are going to be where it's like, all right, we're going to get these certain quotes from certain people, but it's a kind of a lot of waiting around. Is that correct?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the city and like where your hotel is. So like last week we were in Indy, but our hotel was literally across the street from the arena. Nice. And so I have never I probably shouldn't say it like this, but I've never gotten so much running, writing, and drinking in like such a condensed time, because I didn't have to do any chores. I didn't have to run any errands. And like my commute time, like the bar was across the street from the hotel, and the hotel was across the street from the arena. It was like you don't have to do anything except like what you want to do. So it's a lot of fun. Here we're a little further from the arena, but it's actually really it's kind of an interesting way to do like see cities. I mean, I've seen San Antonio before, but like LA, we went a couple of years in a row with the tournament runs, and it's like, you write in the morning, you root for a morning press conference. That way your afternoon can be your own time. And you work hard, but you do get those opportunities to see a city, and without sounding like a jerk, someone else is paying for it. So it's not the worst way to see the country.
Yeah, it's always good. Okay, so see, I love when people sell Indy for me. Like I'm always trying to sell Indy and Indiana, and like, where do Indy and where do these where do those two rank? But like, do you have like top favorite like sports cities?
Yeah, Indy's probably up there, just because the bar district is so well put together. I think obviously the downside is the weather, right? I mean, if you're covering
wintertime. No.
If you're covering a game in January or December, we were there for the Big Ten championship in December, and there wasn't a ton we could do. I mean, just go to different bars. And so in terms of like scenery, it doesn't win, but man, they are like the perfect host city. They have all these bars. They have the circle thing where I don't know what it's called. I always call it the Circle Square, but it's probably not actually correct.
Because it was Market Square Arena, and then we have the Circle, so it's Circle Square. That is what always sticks in my mind too. I don't know why.
And then last week I discovered the river running trail.
Canal.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. So I like Indy a lot. San Antonio's a little bit more spread out, like the Alamo Dome, the AT&T Center, the Alamo. I like the cities where like I don't have to get into a 20-minute car ride or Uber ride. So LA falls for me. I think my favorite is probably Fort Lauderdale, when we cover a couple, like the Orange Bowl.
Really?
That's a nice setup because they've got a very nice bar district. You're never too far from the beach. So that's probably the dream. Like I don't root for a certain thing, but if I could root for something, I would root for an Orange Bowl appearance every year, because they do it right. And the bowl games, they treat the media too well. You know, we get the open bars every single night that we're down there, and the weather's always nice.
Yeah, that's a little different. I feel like bowl
Yeah.
games. I mean, we even heard about back in college where like the players were like, yeah, we got this like bowl game credit. And I got like a whole stereo system. I was like, what the hell? What are you talking about, dude? But they do it right with those bowl games.
And it's always like some bowl game that like most of the country doesn't care about.
No, couldn't care less. Yeah, exactly.
Like go 8-4 and get an iPad or something. Like,
yeah. Oh, back then it was like an iPod. It was like gold back then. I feel like
right.
08, 012 or 2012, like sometime between there, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Yeah. So I want to, I'm trying to keep up. I said before, I'm trying to keep up with like your posts, and like there's a lot of stuff going on right now with media and like a bunch of coverage with the tournament. But first I want to start out like, what are some updates with Devante? Is he going to play? I saw earlier today that he's feeling good and had a workout and was feeling good, but we thought that last time. So is there any more sort of confirmation, or is it more game time decision type thing?
I mean, they're still going to say it's game time decision.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me, the difference between last week and this week is it doesn't feel like they're rushing him. And I don't want to say that they did rush him, but he only did one practice last week. This time it's two. And I think he might've done something the day before too. And he tweeted out he was fully healthy on Sunday. So that's a little different than last week where like, it was like, no one knew. And then suddenly he's in Indy. This seems a little bit more, I guess, on schedule where he's practicing. If he practices 2 days in a row, I would think he would be able to play. I think the question would be like what kind of role he has, and that we don't know. I think Juwan was smart to not say he's going to play just in case, because I'm not a concussion expert, but I do know that it's not the same recovery for every concussion and not the same recovery for every person. Kind of depends on what your medical history is and stuff like that. So probably still technically a game time decision, but they made him available to the media, and they only made 4 players available, and the other were like Hunter Dickinson, Eli Brooks, and Caleb Houston. So my thought is they think he'll start and play at least a role. I mean, the way Frankie Collins is playing, and I mean, I don't think they need to feel like they have to play Devante Jones, but at the same time, I know he wants to play. I mean, we heard from him today, and as anyone who has grown up playing basketball at a level good enough to play in college, I could tell you, like, playing in the tournament's like what you dream about. And he played 4 years of college basketball and didn't even sniff the tournament. So he's been waiting for this one. So I mean, that'll be one of the feel good stories if he can get back and really play a key role in this game. That Michigan kind of earned that opportunity for him, because when he spoke with us after Selection Sunday, he was like the only one that was like really excited. Like he was like, I'm going to go cry when I get home and stuff like that. And like at Michigan, the way they've been playing in the tournament, you don't hear that every year. And like, they're not saying that a lot of times they're like, right, yeah, we're on a mission, one game at a time, the kind of the cliches, but he was like, no, this is cool. And so I was really happy to hear. I mean, I'm happy he got to play last week, but I'm sure in his mind, he's thinking, no, I want to come back for real and like, play this game out and be play a big role in whatever the result is.
Yeah, I was thinking about his position. I was at the game against Tennessee, and my buddy actually had to get the news from my buddy on Twitter that Devante was out, and I was like, oh, it must be concussion stuff. And I was like, he's getting snake bit just constantly, and he can't get right. And I was thinking in my head, and I was like, if I am Devante and I am a senior, I'd be absolutely livid that a freshman elbowed me in the face right before a tournament game. And especially like Musa, nothing against Musa, but Musa, his arms are wild, right? He's a gangly guy. He's very energetic, and he's more action than thought, right? So
his elbow radius is probably like 7 feet, just on
holy hell, right? Yeah. Let alone his fingertips. Yeah, it's just absurd. And I'm like, I'd lose my mind. And he's just been trying so hard, and I'm so happy for him. If he goes 0 for 20 and they lose by 40, like, I'll just be happy that he was actually able to like play in a full game. Fingers crossed that he's able to do it. But it's it's an interesting situation. Those guys don't know it. Like the Michigan kids are like, what are you talking about? Why? Like Devante is just chomping at the bit. So I bet he's like the most grateful ever for a Sweet 16 win. Yeah. I'm curious. I wanted to ask you about the from a media standpoint, the reception of Juwan, I think it was it Kendall? I can't remember the point guard's name. The kid that he kind of.
Oh, Kennedy Chandler.
Yeah, Chandler. Kendall. Yeah. Chandler. Yeah, and how that was received, obviously very well. I would say, kind of for like the Facebook mom audience, that's what I like to call it. Not a bad thing, but like very much, into that sort of thing. And not that it wasn't genuine, but like from a media standpoint, have you heard anything from other sides, like Tennessee people? Like, how is that received genuinely from other people besides like just, some nice tweets here and there?
Yeah, well, media, we're humans too, so we like to see the humanity of sport, and so
right. But I mean, Juwan's punch was just like heard around the world. Like, people don't like him right now, so I'm interested to like hear from that standpoint.
Okay, that's a fair thing. I think most people I talk to are like Michigan media, and we're like we don't want to look at the punch replay one more time. Like we're way past it. Yeah. So no, that's true though. I mean, in terms of like the people who were maybe calling for his head, I don't think too many people were after the dust settled, but I guess that does further the perception that I think has been pushed out there that he's a very genuine player loving coach. I don't know if I've covered a coach who I feel loves his players as much as he does. And to be honest, I was just talking to the hotel manager here about it. Like, part of that punch, and I'm not justifying, I don't really want to get into the debate of it or anything, but he did that out of love for his players. He felt his players were getting shoved and everything. And I think that's, that's something he has, that part, obviously you have to change and correct and everything. But I mean, everything I've ever heard about Juwan Howard is that he loves his players impossibly much. And for those that don't know, Kennedy Chandler, according to Kennedy, he'd been knowing Jet and playing with Jet and AAU ball since 4th grade. Gotcha. I mean, that's a long time. That's not like, I didn't realize that. That's not like, oh, we bonded in prep school or something like that. I mean, that's like, you guys, your families know each other. And so, so that makes, I mean, to me, it made a lot of sense once I heard that. I was like, yeah, that's, if anything, my first question after that was, why is he not playing for Michigan? But, it is what it is. I mean, obviously, recruiting is so much more than, one thing here and there. But, right. But yeah, I mean, I think I've always felt Juwan is very genuine with his emotions. I feel like he's very, he will go to bat for his players. And I think players really love him. I mean, I think, not that this is the person I would cite as the gospel of college basketball. Like Bob Huggins had a nice quote last week. He was like, I can just tell by the players' looks on their faces that they love playing for him. And I think he's just, I mean, you can talk to NBA players, you can talk to Jet and Jace's AAU teammates, you can talk to college players. I mean, this is a very likable person in college basketball. I mean, his contact list is probably insane. He probably gets the coolest happy birthday text from like the coolest people. But anyway, back to the main point. I think my big takeaway was like, yeah, he's very genuine. We were all writing our stories when that happened, so we didn't like see it live or anything. But the other kind of cynical take I have is like, why is Kennedy going to Juwan as opposed to his coaches? And I know like the dynamic of the handshake line is probably why, but yeah, just a genuinely like loving person, especially for his players or people who've played with his kids. And I think he gives out a lot of love. And I think a lot of players, even if they're not on his team, give it back. I mean, this is not the first time. I think Scotty Barnes from Florida State, they had a nice moment after the game last year. I mean, even Ayo Dosunmu, who never played for Juwan or with Juwan and was committed to Illinois before Juwan was even hired, was giving him a hug after one of the Michigan-Illinois games a couple years back. So, yeah, he's well known. He's well liked, and especially to the players. I mean, the media, they can say what they want, but the players love him, and not just his own players, but just anyone who's involved in the basketball community.
Yeah, it's college basketball is interesting because the coaches can, for at least the longest time, especially before social media, they drove their own narrative. So it would be very much like, we love Bob Knight, even we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes type thing. But it is interesting to see like players genuinely like Juwan And like, I'm very skeptical of college coaches all the time because like the curtain got pulled back for me hard. And like, that's nothing against Beeline. It's just like, that's the nature of the game. Right. And they control things. And it's like, it's very different than what you saw before because it was before social media and before people were more honest with these things. So I've been skeptical like left and right. And like, I've yet to hear a bad thing. And the first bad thing, although the signs were there with like some of the aggressiveness with Turgeon, where I was like, okay,
sure.
all right, that was actually a sign. Maybe you should have calmed down a little bit. But it's, you know, competitiveness, we can kind of chalk it up, you know, if he keeps doing it, blah, blah, blah. But
never heard a player, like former player, disgruntled player transfer. I mean, Colin Castleton transferred out of Michigan, still recommended Michigan to Shawnee Brown. You know, they knew each other from the Florida AAU.
That's funny.
I mean, that says something to me. He was gone. He was going to another high major program. Probably did not feel like he got a fair shake under Juwan, but still spoke so highly of like Juwan's character and you know who he was as a coach.
No, God, it's funny you say that because I was like daydreaming about these conversations that Juwan would have with these players, like because players are always, every player always thinks they deserve more minutes, right, and more opportunities. Yeah. And I bet he's the perfect guy to say, hey, buddy, listen, I like you and I think you're talented, but like, you know what? I didn't play you. I'm not going to bullshit you. It's because I didn't think, you know, you fit in or we weren't going to win. And I played the guys I thought were going to win, but I still like you. And I bet that player would believe that. And that's a very hard conversation to have. Like it's easy to kind of spew that out in a couple of sentences, but man, that conversation is difficult. And he has seen it all. And he seems like the most genuine person to have those difficult types of conversations. So it's interesting. I didn't realize he recommended Michigan to Sean D. Like that says everything to me, honestly, because that just doesn't happen.
I mean, I don't know if it was glowing, but you know, Sean D, he came in like, how did you hear about Michigan? It's like, oh, Colin, I knew him from AAU. He spoke really highly of Juwan in the program. And maybe it wasn't the most glowing, but maybe for someone leaving the program that actually, probably never going to be like perfect, but like
for sure. Yeah, super funny. I'd never heard that story. That's good. I like that one a lot. That's interesting. That paints adds a little more to the picture. But I want to get to Villanova because this is a very interesting matchup for me. It's a very nuanced conversation I've like had all day in my own brain. But you put out a lot of stats there, and their matchups it's interesting because they almost kind of align in certain ways, like offensively and defensively, like Michigan's pick and roll offense versus Villanova's pick and roll defense, Villanova's 3-point shooting versus Michigan's 3-point defense, Villanova's short, like how are they going to play? Like there's so many question marks. It could be like a very interesting game, and it feels like a setup for we're trying to predict. Like I listened to Hoops guys talk about the game, and they're very smart and they talk very brilliantly about the kind of setup. And I was like, this Michigan team, like you guys are saying very smart points, like 7 different very smart points, and they could turn around and just like go the exact opposite because we have no idea what's going to go on with this Michigan team. But like, what do you see with this matchup?
Yeah, it almost reminds me of different styles and everything, but it almost reminds me of the like Mo Wagner Michigan teams versus the Isaac Haas, Caleb Swanigan Purdue teams, where like they're just stylistically, they both can score.
Yeah.
They're like stylistically different, and like one of them is going to buckle at some point and have to like change their lineup to maybe suboptimally like keep up. And I think Colorado State offered at least a little bit of a preview where they go small. They have centers who can shoot. I mean, they had maybe one of the more odd, I don't want to say odd in a mean way, but like more interesting players in college basketball where he's like a 6'5", 260 pounder who can shoot threes like crazy. And so, and you saw Michigan, they had their own things to work out. They looked nervous or maybe frantic, maybe not nervous, but they looked off for the first 15 minutes of the game. And then they just looked like the better team. But you also saw little pockets where Hunter struggled to defend a big man who could shoot or struggled, the way that they were kind of creating openings on the perimeter. And so that's something to keep in mind because Dickinson, he can shoot. The names are escaping me, but like all their starters can shoot, and they have a couple bench guys who can shoot threes as well. And so, I think Hunter's going to have a decent time scoring. I think Michigan's really, really good at putting him and Musa in favorable positions. I thought the Tennessee game was a nice clinic, even though Musa missed some easy shots. I mean, both of those players had so many opportunities near the basket or close enough to the basket where they can make a difference. And Hunter's going to be 5 inches taller than anyone Villanova's going to throw out there. And so I think he'll score fine. I think the question is, the defense, will he be able to defend the perimeter? Will he be able to, as you mentioned, Michigan just keeping up on all these different ball screens, all the actions that Villanova runs. I think it almost helps that they got the Colorado game out of their system. I would not compare Villanova to Colorado State in a skill level or effectiveness, but at the same time, at least they're not going into this dry, because the Big Ten this year did not have a ton of small ball centers. There weren't a ton of guys who were going to, pop out and shoot threes, 3 or 4 threes in a game. I'd be curious where Hunter ranked actually among centers in 3-point shooting. And there just weren't a ton of guys who were 6'8" and quick and 240 pounds. There weren't a ton of those types of centers. It was a lot more of the Kofi Coburns and the Hunter Dickinsons and just a lot of big guys. And so they didn't have a ton of practice this year. So that's like the one angle is like one of these teams is going to have to change their lineup or change their rotation a little bit to try to just try to keep the other team in check. So I think Michigan will, I feel good about their ability to score. I don't think it's the same kind of matchup that it was against Tennessee. I think Tennessee was that felt like every possession Michigan was going to have to scratch and fight for 2 points. And this, I think they'll be able to score a little bit more comfortably in this game. They have to make their shots because Villanova, they force a lot of threes or force a lot of 3-point attempts, I should say. But so Michigan's going to have to make a couple to keep everyone honest, but I feel like the size advantage helps Michigan on that end. On the other end, they have to guard every single player. If they have the ball 3 feet behind the line, they're going to have to be right there. So gonna have to see. I mean, it's Villanova. They didn't actually shoot super well against Ohio State. So maybe I don't know. I guess any given game can kind of vary, but they're a team. Their breadth of shooting kind of reminds me of like the 2018 Michigan team.
That's an interesting comparison. It's a very interesting comparison. I mean, Mo is unique. Obviously, no team is going to be perfect, right?
Yeah,
but I think that it's funny to, the hot quote today from Hunter was the Iowa comparison, and is
that wrong though? I'm curious your thoughts. Like that felt decently accurate, actually.
I think it's completely accurate, and I think what he meant was, the word discipline can be interpreted in a few different ways, but discipline, where you don't got Keegan Murray out there who's a top scorer in the nation putting up whatever shot he feels like those big men aren't putting up whatever 3-pointer they feel like. That's just not how that's not how Villanova plays. But they have the capability, so they will shoot less crazy shots. And then Villanova doesn't have a Bohannon. Iowa will just shoot crazy shots, right? All those guys will just jack up whatever. So discipline is a tough word. Not to say I wasn't super disciplined, but Villanova is not letting it fly, but they'll play a similar style. So I thought it was very apt. I thought it was perfect, and people laughed, but it was well thought out from Hunter, which is hilarious. But yeah, he was. I think he was in the mode where he was talking a little crap because he was Ohio State was booing us and Michigan State, and I was they need to hear it because it's hilarious what the Big Ten does, and they beat themselves up at the end of the year, and then this is what happens in the tournament. It's gonna be, there's gonna have to be a lot of change in how the teams play, I feel like. So before I would have said no way Michigan, they can't do it, and they've done it so many times now that they're whatever, we don't even care, take Musa out and it'll be fine. They'll just adapt to whatever's going on. Devante goes out of starting lineup, okay, cool. It was this weird progression where they could not figure out any sort of baseline of who they were first 14 games or whatever.
Yep.
Then they were just that. They were one way for the next 10 games, and it worked a little bit. It looked good, sometimes it looked bad, but it looked better. And then they finally got to the point where well, we can be many different we can put many different hats on. And so that's what they've been doing. You got Colorado State. They know they're gonna have to play very different. So I feel it's this game where on paper you're doing all these scientific comparisons, and Villanova just looks so good. And then you're Michigan will come out. And I said this last game, and I won't pat myself on the back too much, but I was listen, guys, they didn't look super great against Colorado State, but they're very liable to come out against Tennessee and just look like the better team from start to finish. Even if Tennessee is they are like one of the hottest teams in the country. And that's exactly what happens. And it's like trying to predict anything Michigan does is almost impossible at this point.
Yeah. Well, and Jay Wright kind of talked about it today, where he's like, it almost helps them how many different games they had different pieces out. I mean, you think about Terrence Williams, he missed 3 different games for 3 totally different reasons. Hunter Dickinson missed a couple games for 2 different reasons. Devante Jones has missed a couple. Musa missed a game, and you've just had, and it might seem really small to to me or to other outsiders, but you have to go into that game and you have to try a different game plan. You have to try something different. If you just have the same starting 5 and the same, first 3 or 4 guys off the bench the entire season, you're not getting a chance to challenge yourself or put guys in different roles or experiment as much, because you're just playing ball, you're ready to rock. And that's why I always notice there's 1 or 2 Big Ten teams that bring everybody back who don't actually get that much better. I don't know who it was this year, but I know a couple years ago it was Northwestern. They brought the entire team back from their tournament run.
Yep.
But they didn't have that chance to there was no I guess friction, maybe where they're trying to someone's trying to get more minutes, or someone new is coming in and playing a different role. And so I think in a way it helps Michigan. Obviously 14 losses is more than they wanted, but in addition to having different pieces out, they also were humbled in a lot of different ways, where they kind of had to, maybe they weren't going all the way back to the drawing board, but they were like, well, that didn't work. Iowa did whatever, Illinois did whatever. We have to try something different. And so I think it you don't want to be an 11 seed, but I think Michigan's in this weird spot like UCLA was last year, where they're talented, more talented than an 11 seed, but they had so many changes, players leaving the program or players sitting out games or injuries and things like that. And they almost had so many chances to go back to the drawing board or go back and reassess how they're going to play or what's working or who needs to be what role. I mean, think about Eli Brooks. It feels like he's had 3 different seasons this year where at one point he was, kind of in the background and the cursory, just kind of the background guy. And then now suddenly he's having ISO plays and doing hook shots and creating his own looks a lot more. And so I think they're in that weird spot where they're more talented than an 11 seed, but they have the experience of an 11 seed, where they've really actually had to experience the ups and downs, and you see more of your team and yourself and what you're capable of when you have I mean, sure, you can talk about all the different losses where your team grew, whether it felt like it at the time or not, but you're well, that didn't work. We have to reassess a few things here.
No, dude, that is one of the most insightful things I've heard from not even basketball players within their own team can talk about the importance of friction and competition within a team. It's a very touchy subject. It's things it's normally not touched on, but it's a very unspoken. It's one of the most unspoken important things in all of sports. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because that is you got the Frankie with the Devante's brand new, Frankie's brand new, and Eli's been there for 4 years already. And you got 2 new guards coming in. So there's a lot of things, whether it's not bad, but there's a lot of things even me and Novak had constant competition, always unspoken competition. It just happens. And it's important that you keep pushing each other, but you can't let it affect you too much. It's it's a very fine line you walk. So yeah, that's funny. I've never heard anybody mention that before. And honestly, I forget about it a lot of times, but it is something that it's been very useful for them. There's a reason why Frankie comes in and just has that spark, boom, Michigan State game. And because he's chomping at the bit to prove himself, and he thinks he deserves it. He's not just set in his own role. You have to have roles, but you also have
Devante, they love each other, by the way, in open practice. I mean, they're high-fiving. They're they really have a great chemistry, but is Devante, when he comes back to practice, is he not I gotta do something. I gotta step it up.
It's still my team.
He's better than I thought.
Frankie, you're good, but hey, I'm a senior, and relax a little bit. You'll be fine. Yeah, you got 4 more years or whatever. So it's there's a lot of that. It's hilarious, and it's hard to even speak about it. And then guys won't talk about it because it's almost impossible, and it's too much honesty there. So it's a little too much. Yeah. I wanted to. How long have you been covering Michigan basketball?
So my first season was 2015-16. My first season where I wasn't, where I was like doing this for like a full-time job was 16-17. So every season has been either the pandemic or a Sweet 16 actually, since
pretty wild. Yeah. Yeah, you've been very spoiled, which is nice. But you mentioned Eli Brooks, and I missed this in the last week when I recorded. And I'm wondering if you can kind of come up with another example in college basketball, but I can't, at least at Michigan for sure, and maybe not, and probably not in the Big Ten. Another player as versatile as him, and not like versatile like skill wise, but like versatile where you're like, hey, Eli, you're gonna shoot 3 times and guard the best player, and then we're gonna win that way. And then next game you're gonna shoot 14 times and you're gonna have 20 points and 5 assists. And then the next game you're gonna like not do anything for most of the game, and then we're gonna rely on you in this 5-minute stretch, and you're gonna be great. Like, I've never seen someone relied on in so many different ways, in maybe my entire career, like playing basketball. It's very unique, and he always seems ready. Like, have you seen? Can you make another comparison for him?
I probably haven't covered enough other teams to have a great comparison, but you're absolutely right that he's almost like a chess master. It's like, sometimes if you're like a chess player, like you need to come out and like you're on the attack, and sometimes it's just a patience game. And the funny thing is, you mentioned all the different roles. I don't know if he ever got his full credit for any of those roles, among Michigan fans, because he didn't have those really until last week. He didn't have like a 20-point game and like a must-win situation. So,
true.
But he's been, I think he's like the epitome of like when people talk about high IQ basketball players. It's a lot of times it's used like a backhanded compliment where you're like, he's not good, but I've
experienced it. Yes.
Yeah, right. So it's he's like he just shows, I think, how valuable that can be. I think I don't remember who called him. Someone called him the common denominator of Michigan's success. I think I asked Hunter about how Michigan has made 5 straight Sweet 16s, and Hunter called him the common denominator. I think that's like the exact right way I would describe his career. It's like whatever he needed to be, he would be that common denominator. The fact that he was there and playing that role. He's got such a cool story. I mean, I remember I talked to his parents a few years back, and like his dad was a coach, which obviously is a common John Beeline recruit trope. But he was someone. I remember his dad was telling me like he started watching film at age 7 or 8. And not because his dad was like, you need to watch this film. He was that kind of perfectionist, that basketball junkie. And so I think, when I say chess master, I don't say that like to suggest that anything but a compliment. I think he just literally knows basketball so well that like he sees this stuff 2 or 3 steps ahead, where he's like, oh, and this, I mean, I don't know if maybe the coaches are telling him he needs to be this role or that role, but I almost wonder if he tells himself. Like he's like, no, this game, I'm seeing this point guards on, I saw him in warmups, he was doing this, or you can tell by the look in his eyes. I mean, it just seemed, it's crazy that his ability to be the glue guy is probably an overused term, but be that common denominator in Michigan's success. Because you look each year, he played different roles too. I mean, this is not like, oh, he's finally a senior and getting his chance. I mean, this is someone who has really helped Michigan more than I think anyone who looks at any casual viewer has been able to realize, just because he's meshed with so many different players, so many different starting lineups, and I'm going to use the word one more time, but he's been that common denominator when Michigan's had a lot of success.
Yeah, I mean, he's literally like the oldest man in Michigan basketball history. The most games. He's the most experienced man in Michigan basketball history.
158 games. That's crazy.
Yeah, I had the record my senior year. It got broke the next year by Jordan Morgan, and then COVID came along, and I was like, oh, no one's. Eli is just, that's it. That's set in stone. Like, that is done forever. But yeah, he's it's super interesting. It's like he was so consistent, he got overlooked by the coaching staff, and that's not a bad thing, but the coaching staff had so many freshmen to coach up, and they had so many different roles to pull together. It was like, Eli will be fine. We don't have to tell him to do anything. Like, we have so many other things to worry about, let alone our team, the other team, blah, blah, blah. And so his role was just never defined, and it just has grown into this blossom, this beautiful thing where it's like you always want to define a role for players, and this is one kind of instance where it worked out great that you didn't define a role for him, and he's the perfect type of guy to do it. He's got that perfect demeanor for it. He's never too hot, never too cold, and he's always ready to drop of a hat. And his patience, like it's interesting to hear Juwan talk about his leadership and other guys talk about him, and you won't see him say a word
right
on the court. And I love that because I that's how I always tried to play. That's how I was my senior year as a captain. And Zach was always like, you know, the aneurysm of leadership was always the famous thing that he had against Michigan State with that blow up. And he was that type of guy, and I was not. So it is fun to hear that he is leading from that calm standpoint. And not only is he leading, but he's giving his calm skill, and he's kind of projecting it out to everybody else.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm so happy because I was so sad for him for so long, for the first 14 or whatever many games. So I was like, oh no, he came back for this. And it's just brutal. And he's done so much for the program, and he's going to go out in this bad vibe, blah, blah, blah. And of course it's turned around like perfect, because this is what college basketball is. And that's how beautiful sports is in general. Cause you always think, you know, what's going to happen, and you have no idea.
Yeah, no, my favorite, well, not my favorite Eli Brooks story, but one I was thinking of just when you were talking just now is, you know, last week I asked Terrence and Jace Howard about, has Eli Brooks like helped you guys like understand what it takes to win in March? And they were like gushing and raving, and they were like, yeah, he's like been the blueprint, he's been leading the way. And then I asked like, okay, so what like specific advice has he given you guys? And they didn't have an answer. Like they kind of gave like a generic answer. I'm like, yeah, that probably sums it up, that he's giving all they sense his leadership more than they hear it, which I think a lot of times that's probably the best leadership. Because I mean, you know, player to player, you could speak on this way better than I could, but like the speeches are great, but like they're not always what you need to like really settle in or get into a zone or like get better. Sometimes you just need to see someone else kind of leading the way and showing game to game, you know, what kind of value they can be. I mean, it's crazy, you know, with Eli, I almost forget sometimes. You know, I look at the box scores and see like, you know, who's been good the last 10 games or whatever, and he'll have like 9 straight double-digit scoring games.
Yeah,
I'm like I completely overlook it, you know, in the moment, because like he's not like the star, but you're, you know, he's almost like I don't know, like a jar full of rocks, and he's like the sand that fills in the cracks and fills in the void of like what's going to make this team whole. And so and you're absolutely right. I mean, he's pretty soft-spoken with us. It sounds like he's less soft-spoken with the team, but at the same time, he's always been just kind of see and react, and he's all those cliches of future head coach or head coach on the floor and, you know, high IQ, but like I think he, you know, I'm really, as an individual, I'm really happy for him that he got to actually use that in a way where he's a 2-year captain. He got to be, you know, kind of the face of the team for a couple of years, because sometimes those kinds of players, you mentioned the coaches kind of forget, because you're like not a liability in practice. You know, he wasn't a superstar recruit. I don't want to say like they always get overlooked, but sometimes they don't get that chance to have like, now everyone knows his name. And I think if he, you know, if different things had broken one way or another, I don't know that he gets these last 2 years where he's been able to be a captain and a face of the team. And so, I mean, what a good example. I don't think you make it very far in the NCAA tournament if you don't have someone like Eli Brooks on your team. And so, yeah, for him to be able to show the rest of the team, I don't know who the next Eli Brooks is. You know, it's you know, that's a discussion for maybe a couple weeks from now. But you know, Juwan Howard used the word irreplaceable. He said it twice in a row, actually, when I asked him about Eli the other day. And so, and he's right. He's right. I mean, if there was one player you could take from this team, you know, maybe Hunter, just because of his size and his scoring ability, but it might be Eli Brooks. Or if you take one player from the team, you know, what unravels this season the most, it probably is Eli Brooks.
Yeah, it's he's also a great sticking point for me with fans who kind of want to pigeonhole guys early on. Like if you would have said like, oh, Eli sophomore, junior year, not very skilled, probably like, you know, he'll be fine and he'll be like a role player. And it's like, listen, when guys get to a certain level, like there's skill that like they just can't always show, like the skill that you can't imagine that they have, and it's there. So it's beautiful to watch him be able to just put that on display and have that opportunity. So it's been very fun. To your point there, the other player is obviously very important is Hunter Dickinson. And that is, it's not an ace up his sleeve because, Hunter's displayed all over Michigan's game plan, but there is no player, I think, in the NCAA right now kind of affecting games as much as he is, I think, from an individual standpoint, at least in the tournament. And I think he's really turned it on in like the last 10 games. He's playing like player of the year, and he's obviously not elected for that, rightfully so, because of, the whole season. But I just don't know if there's a more impactful player in terms of just like winning a game single-handedly than Hunter right now. I'm trying to think of one. I don't know if I can.
Yeah. And I'm curious. I mean, this won't be the game where it happens, but if they happen to win and they happen to go up against another like good 7-footer, I'd be curious like if it still happens. Cause I will say, this is not to discount what he did, but because he had to make sure that he was still effective. But Colorado State had one guy taller than 6'8". Yeah. Tennessee, I think, had one guy taller than 6'7". He was 6'9". So I'll give him a lot of credit because I think he had an opportunity to be elite last weekend, and he was. I don't think every time there's someone taller than someone else that taller person's going to be better, but sure. I think it's a perfect combination of he had the right matchups. He talked to us on Selection Sunday about how much he was looking forward to not playing the same centers that he's been playing the last 2 years. And this is kind of the unspoken part that I don't have the facts for this, but sometimes I wonder, like when Kofi Coburn gets the ball in the post, and you're watching a Big Ten game, I'd be curious, like how often does the ref immediately like kind of clench the lip, like they're ready to call.
They know exactly what's going down.
Yeah. And so I think and Edie, I think, was in a similar, but I mean, there's just so much of that, like the big man does the post up and they get the foul every time in the Big Ten, and in the NCAA that doesn't always happen. I think that really helped Mo Wagner. I remember more so 17 than 18, but he could never stay on the court. He always got that second foul, and then he stopped playing in front of the same officials in the Big Ten setting every game, and all of a sudden he's on the court and he's amazing. And so you have that, you have the good matchups, but he also, like, I think he's just a legitimately funny person, but I think sometimes that distracts from like how crafty and hard of a worker and like how devoted to the craft of scoring in different ways he is. I mean, I remember, he's not Luka Garza. They're totally different players, but like they knew each other, they've played against each other. And I think they're similar in the sense where like it's almost like a video game where they've got like this dialogue of buttons in their head that they're like, okay, he's got his elbow here and his hips here. And they're like figuring out the best way to score. And you can almost see the thought process on the court. Not every big man can do that. Sometimes big men are just big and they score. And so and he's someone that just has this whole catalog and the 3-point shooting, but also his mid-range shots, I thought got a lot better this season. Just the little hooks or the turnaround shots.
It's crazy.
And I mean, against Tennessee, he was hitting pretty much all of them. And you could just see the catalog working. I mean, it's and that's, again, I don't think Tennessee's hanging their hat on their post play this season. So that was probably a slightly favorable matchup for him, but he got a lot better this season. I don't think he ever got enough credit for how much better he got, because the team got worse, but he got a lot better. And I think you're seeing now that he isn't playing, the same Big Ten big men who have a full scouting report on him. Yep. And the officials who maybe already have what calls they're going to call in mind. Suddenly he's blossoming. Suddenly all that improvement is really showing in a big way. Not to mention, I mean, he's not a leader too. He might not be getting all the captain credit that Eli Brooks gets, but like he's on the court. He speaks with us after losses. He puts a lot of this team on his shoulders, and I think that really says a lot about him, but also says a lot about how much this team looks up to him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sophomore, and Frankie's a freshman, Moose is a freshman, Kale's a freshman, and that's 3 of the 6 guys that play the most minutes. I mean, Terrence is a sophomore. So yeah, he had to take on that leadership role early. He got spoiled a little bit. I think it was a learning curve for him at the beginning of this year for sure. And he, I think you saw in the first 14 games, or I keep mentioning 14, however many games it was, he wasn't the same Hunter that he was last year. And he was like, okay, things got to be a little different. I got to change a little bit. And he has progressed just immensely. And I think he caught a little big old chip on his shoulder. He heard Kofi first team and talking about player of the year candidates, yada, yada, yada. He wasn't mentioning any of that. And he's like, screw this. And just like Michigan, that it's not a coincidence that they're peaking at the same time. Like, he's playing like a player of the year while Michigan is playing like a 3 seed or whatever it is, like a top team in the nation. So it's you'd always say peak in March, and my team's never had that. And you just you weather the storm and you peak in March and everything is golden, and that's exactly what's going on right now. So it's beautiful to watch. Before we get out of here with your predictions, I'm interested because in Indy it was very orange. It was very volunteer orange. I didn't like it, and I'm wondering what the vibe is down there with Michigan fans. Have you seen some Michigan fans down there? Are they funneling in right now, or what's going on?
I think they'll outdo Villanova. I think they'll have the fan advantage for that one. But
that's fair.
There's a lot of alumni in Dallas and Houston, Austin, and probably San Antonio too. I've talked to a few over the years, and they're like, every time Michigan football or basketball plays in Texas, we go, or we try to get
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
because it's not that often. I mean, they're not doing non-conference games with Texas or Baylor or anything like that, and so they try to make a point to go. So that should help. Unfortunately for Michigan and Villanova, getting to San Antonio from the north right now is insane. I don't know if you've looked at prices or fans took a peek at prices.
No.
It's brutal. I mean, it's a small airport. They don't have they're not like an airport hub or anything. So it's just the prices are crazy high. Once you get down here, it's not, an overly expensive place to visit, but yeah, it's a tough place to get to. So I think if Michigan were to advance, whether it's Houston or Arizona, because Arizona is a longer road trip, but Houston, that's 3 hours from here.
Yeah,
that would be a road game. That would be like playing Kansas in Wichita, or playing Duke in Charlotte. It seems like sometimes these regionals are just put exactly where they think a 1 seed can go, and so or like playing a Gonzaga in Seattle. Like, it would be that kind of level of road environment. But for tomorrow, I think Michigan will have the fan advantage. I don't know a ton about Villanova's how well they travel, but one, they're a smaller school. 2, I don't think they have the alumni presence in Texas that Michigan does. Because I've covered a couple events in Texas at this point. There was a football game back in 2017. There was the Final Four a few years ago. Michigan travels really well, and their alumni events will get, for those games, it was like 1,000+ people at these alumni events. I don't know if they'll get that tomorrow because it's a Sweet 16 and it's on a Thursday. So if you work in Dallas, you might not be making the trip, but they'll do better than Villanova. I don't think they have a chance to do better than Houston. And right now, tickets are, if you are in Texas, tickets are pretty affordable compared to the other Sweet 16 events.
Interesting. I guess. Yeah.
Michigan, Tennessee was waiting for that one, though. In terms of last week, I know some Michigan fans were surprised that Tennessee traveled so well. They travel crazy well. And that was it's not far from Indiana. People don't realize it's close. It's like Lexington was 2 hours because Kentucky was in the same pod. Those two fan base, I knew they were going to outdraw an 11 seed Michigan. In that event, and credit to Michigan. Everyone was worried about it in the first 5 minutes of the game. They quieted the crowd. They didn't never seem fazed by the moment or anything.
Michigan controlled the whole game, and then Hunter, for whatever reason, let the Tennessee band know what he was saying at the end. That was very funny. But before we get out of here, Zach, one of the things I hate the most in this world is predictions, but I'm going to make you predict this game, and I'm going to throw mine out there too. And I will start. I'm going to go with One, I saw the line at Musa over under 8.5 points, and I think it's going to be over there. I think he's got also a height advantage on all the other Villanova guys, and they're all going to be focused on Hunter's height and kind of working around him. Villanova does a lot of switches, and I think Musa's going to kind of be forgotten because he's had quieter games. So that's one prediction I will make. The game prediction, I think it's going to be in the 60s. I'm going to go like 68, 64, Michigan. A little bit of a homer score there, but I think it is going to be a little lower, going to be a little slower, and a little better defense. And then what was my other prediction? Oh, Eli over 12 points. I think that was like an easy one for me. And I'm like, yeah, those three, boom, running with it. But what do you got in terms of score? What are you predicting?
I like the Eli over under, by the way. He's the announcers are going to say like 4 times tomorrow, he's playing like he doesn't want to go home yet. But it's true. Yeah. It is true. I mean, he's like the one example of like, okay, no, he really is thinking about this. I keep thinking like in my head, Villanova's the better team, but I keep trying to look in like the NCAA tournament lens. And I don't think, there's a couple things that give me pause. One, Michigan's just so much taller than Villanova down low. And like, at some point, that's just going to lead to some easy buckets and some easy block shots, and they're going to be able to rebound really well. Villanova's already not a great post defense team, and they're not a great defensive rebounding team. So, like, even if Michigan's a little off from 3, at some point they're going to get like some freebie buckets here and there. So I'm kind of, the other thing with Villanova is I was looking at their schedule this season. They've had a great season. Other than UConn, I don't believe they've beaten like a true, in Tennessee. They beat Tennessee like the second week of the season. But other than Tennessee and UConn, it's not like they've, they lost a lot of really impressive games, to Purdue or to Baylor. A couple of the other teams in my head are escaping me. But like, I think if I'm viewing Michigan just from what they showed in the NCAA tournament, I think this is much more even in terms of talent, skill level, who's peaking at the right time and stuff. So I often, my readers will tell you, I often pick against Michigan, and they like when I pick against Michigan because a lot of times Michigan will win. I can't get past those two things that like, I don't think Villanova's this like juggernaut and despite their seed. And I think Michigan has a height advantage that, I mean, basketball coaches recruit tall players for a reason, right? like at some point science takes over just a little bit. I mean, teams with short centers obviously can win, and Villanova very well could beat Michigan. I think they could blow Michigan out the way they get hot sometimes, but I'm actually going to lean Michigan. I've got a little higher scoring. I'd probably go like Michigan 80, Villanova 76, something. Oh, dang. Okay. Something in that nature. It sure would be fun. I always
that would be a lot more fun.
Games.
That would be way better to watch. Yeah. But the 60s is like a Big Ten game. People don't want to see that stuff, but we'll see.
Michigan is just hard to predict too, because they could lay an egg, or they could lay an egg early and come back like they did a couple times last week. So difficult to predict.
No,
impossible. Going with my gut on that one.
Yeah, it is truly impossible to predict. I mean, I would not be surprised if Michigan won. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost by 20. But yeah, I kind of sticking with that Hunter factor. Last week it was, Tennessee is so good defensively across the board, and then Michigan was like, all right, cool, whatever, we got Hunter, and then we're gonna exploit every spot that they haven't been exploited in yet. So you never know. And that tournament lens, that's a perfect way to put it, because that's how I view it. It's like St. Peter's is in the Sweet 16. So the tournament lens, like, it's very different than looking at the stat sheet. So it'll be fun. And Zach, I appreciate you coming on. This was great talking to you. And hopefully we're talking next week again, or coming back to this and watching them in the following weekend. So it'll be fun. But
absolutely. What a great podcast you're on. You're such a good podcast host. So thanks for having me on.